May 19th, 1968. Mekong Delta, Vietnam. Inside the turret of an M41 Walker Bulldog, it's 150 degrees. Corporal John Kellogg drops into his seat as AK-47 fire rips from the tree line. "Let's go! Kick it in the ass and get us up front!" The tank surges forward, rounds pinging off the hull. This tank could easily crush a massive crocodile and stand against 5 charging rhinos. But what happened next, no one could explain. May 19th, 1968. Mekong Delta, Vietnam. Inside the turret of an M41 Walker Bulldog. It's 130 degrees. The steel has been soaking in the tropical sun for 6 hours. Sweat runs down every surface. The gun breech, the rangefinder housing, the backs of 4 men who haven't showered in a week. Diesel fumes mixed with gun oil, and the metallic taste of recycled air. The engine ticks, the radio hisses. Corporal John Kellogg, 20 years old, Pennsylvania, is standing in the commander's hatch of B-12. His crew calls the tank Beelzebub. The radio crackles. Charles is in the area. Every Marine knows Charlie means the enemy, but Charles throws them for half a second. Then AK-47 fire rips out of a hedgerow less than 100 feet away, and the confusion ends. Kellogg drops into his seat. "Let's go! Kick it in the ass and get us up front!" His driver, Private First Class Stanley Williams, punches the throttle. 30 tons of steel surge forward. Rounds ping off the hull. Sharp metallic everywhere. Kellogg swings the turret, calls a target to his gunner, Sergeant Carlos Trinidad. The 76mm booms canister. Everything in the blast cone disappears. Then something happens that Kellogg will never fully explain. A thought enters his mind without invitation. Not a sound, not a shadow. No movement in his peripheral vision, just a certainty. Traverse, right? He grabs the override, rips the turret away from his gunner, and spins at 76 degrees at maximum speed. The instant the gun reaches 3 o'clock, an RPG detonates on the gun shield. The thickest armor on the entire vehicle, the blast that would have punched through the thinner turret side and killed everyone inside instead. Rings off the heaviest plate on the tank. Through the smoke, Trinidad screams, "I see them! I see them! I see them!" The RPG team is standing in the open, reloading. Kellogg's gun is pointed directly at them, loaded with high explosives. They look too close for the round to arm. He fires anyway. The shell hits the dirt at their feet, reaches minimum arming distance by inches, and detonates. They vanish. But Kellogg's war isn't close to over. This battle will last 6 more hours. It'll put 73 pieces of shrapnel into his body. And somewhere in the middle of it, another tank commander is going to order something so insane, it sounds like a lie. Until you understand what canister does to a human body. We'll get there. First, you need to understand what this machine was and why nobody believed it would work here. 1965, the Pentagon. The conventional wisdom was absolute. Tanks cannot operate in jungle warfare. The terrain is too dense. The roads are too narrow. The bridges can't hold you 30 tons. McNamara believed it. The Army's counterinsurgency manual devoted 3 paragraphs to armor. The Marines shipped an entire division to Vietnam without a single tank. Then they discovered the enemy was fighting from concrete bunkers that rifles couldn't crack, that infantry was being pinned in open paddies with no cover, and that men were dying in the 15 minutes it took to get artillery on target. They needed something that could park 30 yards from a fortified position and erase it. The fact that every general in Washington said it wouldn't work was irrelevant to the Marines getting killed without one. The M41 Walker Bulldog arrived at Da Nang on March 8, 1965, 3rd Platoon, Bravo Company, 3rd Marine Tank Battalion, the first American tanks in Vietnam, about 30 tons. A 76-millimeter gun that could punch through 3 feet of reinforced earth or kill a Soviet tank at 2,000 meters. A crew of 4 was sealed inside a cast steel with no air conditioning. Frontal armor thick enough to bounce RPGs. Interior that regularly hit 130 degrees. The diesel engine burned fuel so fast that the tank needed resupply every few hours in combat. Loaders vomited from the heat and kept loading. 4 men, a driver above 1 inch of belly armor and whatever was buried in the road, a gunner peering through a slit, a loader wrestling 40-pound shells in a space too small to stand, a commander half exposed in the hatch, directing everything while someone tried to put an RPG in his chest. Everyone told them this tank didn't belong here. Over the next 8 years, the M41 would prove that wrong in 4 completely different kinds of war. Each one was its own kind of horror. The first thing infantry learned about the M41 was what came out of the 76-millimeter gun when you loaded canister. A canister round is a thin aluminum shell packed with more than 1,200 steel balls, each the size of a marble. When the gun fires, the casing shreds apart at the muzzle and the balls erupt in a cone. At 50 yards, the pattern is 6 feet wide. Nothing in that cone survives. At 100 yards, 12 feet. At 200, every ball is moving faster than a rifle bullet. The targets don't hear the shot. The steel arrives before the sound. The M41 had turned a 76-millimeter tank gun into the largest shotgun on the battlefield. In every major engagement from 65 to 73, pinned infantry called for tanks with canister before artillery or air support. A tank could park 30 yards from a tree line and erase everything in it with one trigger pull. Remember what canister does. Remember how it works. You'll need that in about 5 minutes. Mines killed more M41s than any other weapon in Vietnam. Not RPGs, not recoilless rifles, not enemy tanks. Over half of all Walker Bulldog tanks destroyed in the war were lost to explosives buried under roads and trails. The belly armor was 1 inch thick, the thinnest plate on the entire vehicle, and the driver sat directly above it. When a command detonated, mine went off under an M41. Every crew told the same story. The tank left the ground 30 tons airborne. Then the blast came through the floor. The driver absorbed it first. Spinal compression, skull fracture, often dead before the tank settled back into the crater. Corporal Paul Johnson survived a mine strike in '69 that killed his driver instantly and wounded the rest of the crew. His account is 3 sentences long and tells you everything. The explosion was deafening. The tank shook violently, and the man below him was gone. The cruelty of mine warfare wasn't the explosion, it was the waiting. Every road, a lottery. Every vibration, a potential detonation. Veterans described a feeling they called floating, a dissociation that set in with the column started moving and didn't lift until they stopped. And here's the thing, they don't tell you. The M41 crew survived mine strikes 60% of the time. An M113 armored personnel carrier, 30%. A jeep or truck, 10. The steel box that could become your coffin was still the safest seat in the war. February 1968. The Tet offensive hits city, and the M41 enters a war nobody designed it for. The streets are too narrow. Tracks scrape buildings on both sides. The 76mm couldn't elevate high enough for snipers on upper floors. Every intersection was a 3-point turn under RPG fire, but without tanks, the Marines couldn't advance. The enemy had fortified every compound, every wall. The M41s became battering rams, fire a high explosive at a building, walk infantry through the hole, next building, block by block, day after day. Some tanks absorbed close to 100 RPG hits and kept fighting. Every impact produced spalling fragments of the crew's own armor, breaking loose from the inside of the hull, ricocheting around the turret like shrapnel from your own machine. 140 degrees sealed hatches, periscopes caked with dust and blood, and another rocket is hitting every few minutes. Colonel Bob Thompson watched his tankers come back after days in the streets. They reminded me of nights returning to the castle after fighting the dragon. Lieutenant Colonel Ernest Cheatham estimated that without the tanks, casualties in Hue would have exceeded the 60% they already suffered. The Marine Corps concluded the M41 was the single most effective weapon of the battle, 100 RPG hits, and the tank kept moving. Then came the night the M41 fought a war it was actually built for, and nobody could believe it was happening. March 3, 1969, Ben Het Special Forces Camp, where Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia meet Captain John Stovall, had M41A3s dug into hull defilade positions around the perimeter. Holes behind dirt berms, turrets exposed, infrared searchlights ready. The NVA didn't know the tanks were there. Their intelligence said Ben Het was lightly defended. Perfect target for the 2002nd Armored Regiment, Soviet PT-76 amphibious tanks, and BTR-50 personnel carriers. The plan was a conventional armored assault. Tanks against infantry. At 0200, NVA artillery hit the camp. Under the barrage, PT-76s rolled out of the tree line, guns firing. They expected Green Berets and machine guns. They found Walker Bulldogs in the dark. Stovall's gunner acquired the first PT-76 through infrared optics. The enemy didn't have 76 millimeters high explosive. The shell struck the turret ring. 14 millimeters of Soviet armor gave way instantly. Ammunition detonation. The flash lit the battlefield, and for the first time, the NVA saw what they'd driven into. A second PT-76 tried to flank, got bogged in a rice paddy. So the lighter tank sank where the heavier M41 never would have. A BTR-50 took combined fire while trying to retreat. It exploded. By 0400, it was over. Every NVA vehicle destroyed or abandoned. The first American tank versus tank engagement since Korea. The camp-held armor doesn't fight armor in a guerrilla war, except when it does. Now, back to the Mekong Delta. Back to Kellogg. Back to the battle where all four horrors happened on the same afternoon, May 19, 1968. Ho Chi Minh's birthday. The NVA had prepared a present. 6 hours into the fight, First Lieutenant Harris was back at the base with a toothbrush in his hand, listening to gunfire rolling in from the Delta. His platoon was taking casualties. He radioed for permission to reinforce. Nobody with authority could be found. 45 minutes. He waited 45 minutes while his Marines fought. When the permission came, he climbed into a tank, displaced the crew commander of B-15, took the hatch himself, and led the relief column down the river path with Marines clinging to the hull. A dozen men on his tank, a dozen more on B-14, a 120 degrees inside the turret. They drove into the middle of it. A mortar round landed among Fox Company Marines, killing the company commander. Harris, still exposed in his hatch, started directing leaderless grunts toward the enemy while his crew fired everything they had. His loader, Corporal René Certa, lost track of time. Shell after shell, spent casings piled around his legs, hot enough to sear skin and singe the hair off his calves. When casings jammed the turret, he popped his hatch and threw them out barehanded. An RPG hit the turret beside him. The metal inside glowed orange with spalling. Shrapnel stitched across his back, caught by an army flak jacket he'd grabbed on impulse before rolling out. He wiped blood off his face and went back to loading. Then NVA soldiers climbed onto Harris's tank. They came up the rear deck outside the main gun's arc. Corporal Pat Badger on B-14 saw it first. 15. This is 14. You got Charlie climbing on your tank. Harris's response. Roger 14. Scratch our back. B-14. Loaded canister rotated its turret toward its own sister tank and fired. More than 1,200 steel balls hit the rear deck of B-15. The blast ripped off antennas, shredded the exterior racks, and swept the NVA soldiers off the hull as if they had never existed. The M41's cast armor absorbed the canister without penetrating. The crew inside felt the impact. They survived it. The men climbing the tank did not. This is why you needed to remember what the canister does. The only weapon that could save B-15's crew was the same round that turned human beings into nothing at 50 yards. Fired at their own tank by their own people to keep them alive. But B-15 was dying. RPGs had punched through the engine compartment. Transmission dead. Fuel tanks ruptured. Smoke filled the turret, then flame. Harris looked at his crew through the fire. Okay, gents. Looks like we've got two choices. We can either stay in here and burn up with the tank or jump out and get shot. What do you want to do? They jumped. Seda, nearly limp from blood loss, had to be lifted out by Harris, who carried him 50 meters to a bomb crater while rounds cracked past them both. B-15 burned on the road. Back at the base, medics cut Kellogg's uniform off and started counting. A corpsman pushed 4 IVs, 1 in each arm and leg. All 4 bags ran dry before the helicopter arrived. Surgeons counted 73 shrapnel holes across his body, pulled the biggest fragments, stitched over the rest. 11 tankers received Purple Hearts that afternoon. 6 were evacuated. Every one of the Harris's 5 tanks took at least 3 RPG hits. 1 burned on the road. Over 100 NVA dead were credited to the platoon, the wrong weapon in the wrong war, doing the only thing that could have saved those Marines on Ho Chi Minh's birthday. 3 years later, the M41 proved it one final time, Easter 1972. The NVA launched the largest conventional invasion of the war. Over 200,000 troops, hundreds of T-54 tanks, 3 offensives aimed at cutting South Vietnam in half. By now, almost every American ground unit had gone home. What remained were South Vietnamese crews and American machines. At Dong Hae, the ARVN 20th Tank Regiment, South Vietnamese tankers in American M41. A3s met the T-54 columns hauled down behind the Qua Viet River. Opening exchange, 2 T-54s destroyed. 9 Type 63 light tanks were knocked out. 0 M41s lost. Over the following week, 16 more T-54s were killed. 1 Chinese Type 59 was captured intact at An Loc. The siege lasted 3 months. ARVN tankers destroyed over 90 NVA tanks. Captain John Ripley, a Marine advisor, spent 3 hours dangling beneath the Dong Ha Bridge under fire from approaching T-54s, wiring 500 pounds of explosives to the structure. He dropped a bridge into the River Navy Cross. The time he bought saved the line that held through the entire offensive. The tank that didn't belong in the jungle had just won the largest armored engagement of the Vietnam War. It couldn't last. In 1975, South Vietnam fell. ARVN tank regiments ran out of parts, then fuel, then ammunition. Hundreds of M41s were captured intact. The NVA put them in their own corps. 4 years later, American-built Walker Bulldogs rolled into Cambodia under a communist flag. American steel, American guns, American design, firing for the other side. But every lesson the M41 bled for came home. The RPG hits at Hue drove composite armor. The mine strikes led to V-shaped hulls. The tank duels at Dong Ha proved crew training mattered more than raw armor thickness. Every one of those lessons is built into the M1 Abrams. The M41 Walker Bulldog is still in active service. Turkey, Greece, Taiwan. Over 50 years. After Da Nang, the design is still fighting. John Kellogg still feels the shrapnel on rainy days. 73 fragments. Some of them pulled out, some of them left. Lieutenant Harris, the officer who climbed into a tank he didn't have to let a relief column down a road he could have stayed off, ordered canister fired at his own vehicle and carried a bleeding Marine to a crater while his tank burned behind him. Said it simply, "We took a hell of a beating, but we gave worse than we got. 30 tons, 130 degrees, inside 1 inch of belly armor between you and the road, and every general in the Pentagon